This project has been a nightmare. I just bought this E350 ton van and no brakes. But then I backed it up, the brakes came back, and I've been thinking we had a brake leak, but the fluid hasn't come down. And I had to buff out logo on the side of it. I had to sand it down with 400 grit sandpaper and sand the back of it down. I get out my buffing wheel and it has just come apart. But anyways, it's making a terrible grinding noise, and I'm thinking wheel bearing. So the right side looked just fine, and when I go to the left side, oh my gosh, I got nothing but roller bearings all over in there, and I'm not sure how to. This thing's a ton van. I think the inside, the inner outboard bearing is going to be fine, but the inboard bearing is shot. It has totally come apart, and I hope my brake pad's still going to be. I got all this wear on the outside here, so whenever I hit the brakes, the wheel is just flopping. So that's my project for today, is wheel bearings. This is what happens when you don't routinely tighten them up. They just disintegrate. As soon as I grabbed the wheel and it was flopping all over the place, I knew I had a problem. The other thing is, I couldn't get the lug nuts off. I had to take a 3-foot cheater bar to get these lug nuts loose. My impact wouldn't even phase them. This was really weird. These two guide pins are two different sizes. One is a T45, the other one's T50. So those two guide pins are two different sizes. That was a nightmare. And my spindle's pretty gnarled up, but we're going to try and save it. But the wheel seal is completely gone. There's no bearing at all. It is just totally gone. Well, that's why you shouldn't drive through high water, I guess, or you should periodically grease this. That's the inner part of the bearing. It is seized to the spindle. Last time I dealt with this, and it's the only thing I can think of, is we're going to have to take some kind of grinder and grind it here so that I can get a chisel in there to bust it, because that is seized to the spindle, the inner part of the bearing. This is just great. I thought I just needed to replace bearings or tighten them up, and I can't put another bearing on that. Great. I don't know what else to do to get this off of here. I've tried chisels, everything else, so I'm trying to grind it off with this air grinder. But you got to be very careful. We don't want to nick up the spindle. I've been pounding on this thing, and the inner part of the bearing is seized to the spindle, and I have been pounding, and it's getting late, and I don't want to wake the neighbors, but I've got it off to this point, and I have got it to spin about 1/4 of an inch. But see, this is why you shouldn't drive through high water. How else do you get it rusted to the bearing, rusted to the, see, this is the inner part of the bearing here, and it's rusted to the spindle. So it was driven through high water and probably got hot, and I don't know, it's rusted to there. I don't know what else to do. what we're trying to do is cut this off in sections and chisel it off. I really don't know what else to do here. I did hit the spindle right here and put a score in it, but hopefully that'll buff out. Alright guys, I got it off. But now I'm wishing I hadn't even started this project. Here's what's left of the wheel bearing when I finally got it off. I got enough grooves cut in the side of it that I could take chisels and hit here and drive the thing off, and I had to go from the top, bottom, in 3 different ways. Finally got it off. But if you look at the inside of this bearing, I was watching a show on YouTube the other day about making rockets and how they don't arc weld, they do what's called friction weld. They sit here and spin over top of it until they melt the 2 pieces of aluminum together. And that's exactly what's happened here. We've got friction weld where and I don't know how much of this scoring on the inside is going to affect this spindle. But like right there, I mean, that is scored so bad. That I did with the grinder, but I don't know how I'm going to get to see this rust. How do you get water inside a bearing if inside the hub unless you're driving through high water? But see what the rotor has done to the inside of the caliper in there? Because when you would push the brake, it would push the rotor out, and it was scoring the heck out of, see, look at that. It was scoring the heck out of things. That was what's left of the bearing. The inside of the bearing. See that cracking? See where it's missing because it friction welded itself to the spindle. Parts of metal's gone. Yeah, so much for a vehicle that had all kinds of preventative maintenance like they claimed. So, to burnish this up, I've had to take emery cloth, 120 grit emery cloth, and get all the roughness out of it.
Click the thumbs up and click the notifications bell and subscribe. See ya. Get back.
So I had to take a magic marker and turn this red, and then what I would do was I'd take the bearing and push it on there and wiggle it back and forth until I figured out where it was hitting at. And first thing I tried, but it was tearing stuff up, was one of these on the end of an angle grinder, but it was putting flat spots. So I found that a pink grinding wheel, I thought the gray ones were too aggressive, and I would have to literally go around everywhere. I'd find a little scrape mark on the Sharpie, went all the way around until I could finally almost get the bearing on, but right in here we had some more friction weld. So we had to use a die grinder. Then I went to these little tiny diamond bits to get right in through there. I've literally had to grind all this welded metal away. And some of it, when I got right in here, it'd start flaking off. So we can get our bearing within a 1/16 of an inch. And that worked. This wouldn't work because you couldn't get the angle in like this. So I had to go to a ball diamond tip to get in through here, because what was happening was I still had some welded metal laying in here. It was not a it wasn't at a right angle, which is what I want. I need a right angle for the bearing. So we use the die grinder and the electric cutoff wheel to get it off. So now we're ready to get the old hub out. Because at this point I can get the bearing within a 1/16 of an inch, and I think it's going to pull in the rest of the way. Emery cloth held up a lot better than sandpaper would, but I am so close there, I'm going to call it good. So let's get the old races driven out and the bearings greased up and get this thing back together. It's been a nightmare. I mean, but you can see the low spots from with the Sharpie. So I do got a bunch of flat spots, but I think it's gonna be, I think it'll be all right. Better than it was, that's for doggone sure. We are going to clean this with some mineral spirits and make sure we get all of that grit off from the problem with this wheel is it was really sending sand all over the place. Okay, after you pull the old race out of there, just drive it out with a cold chisel. Drive that out of the rotor with the cold chisel. Drive that out with the cold chisel. Get you one of these race drivers and seat it in there. Seat it in until it bottoms out. Then you put your bearing in there after you grease your bearing. And now we need to get this wheel seal in there. And there's the front bearing all ready to go. And then we'll tighten it up in a minute. Alright, at this point, you don't have to take this off. You just slide it in and get it ready to go. And you shove your front bearing, your outboard bearing in. The washer is slotted. It only goes one way. You got to get the wheel seal to go on there. That's why I put some grease all around the spindle. And then once you get your nut on there, we're going to show you. I got to get the brakes back on before I can show you how to tighten this up. What we're going to do, I don't have a socket big enough. It's over an inch nut. The nut for the propeller on the boat might work. I'm going to put a wrench here, and we're going to take it to about 30 foot-pounds to seat the bearing, and then we're going to back it, off until, as we spin the wheel, and we're going to fill the play, and then we're going to take all the play out of it, and that's where we're going to put the castle nut, or the castle cap, whatever it's called, over there with a new cotter pin in it. But I got to figure out how these brakes go back together. And then we'll get her. Okay, it's getting dark on me, but it took me forever to figure out how this clip goes here, this clip goes here, and the brakes actually seat and ride in those clips. The caliper, there was a trick to it. You have to put the top up first, and then you push the bottom in. It is so simple. It is probably the easiest. I mean, all there is two bolts. The easiest brake job I've ever seen. Of course, I'm not replacing the brakes. They look good, but there's these clips. I highly recommend you take a picture of them before you take them off. There seems to be a top one and a bottom one, but the clips clip onto this bracket here, and then your brakes slide in these grooves right here, and then to put the caliper on, there's a little notch right there, and there's a knot down here, and it goes up and in. Now, these bolts that hold it on are two different size torques. I don't know why. I imagine one's been replaced and the other one hasn't. It's probably the case. But they just go right here, and right here. Right here, take these two screws out is all there is to changing the brakes, and why somebody would pay to change the brakes on a car. And if you got to bleed them, I guess that gets sort of difficult, but all you got to do to bleed them is loosen this up and have somebody push on the pedal. If you knew what you were doing, it wouldn't take 10 minutes to change these brakes. It's going to take you longer to jack the car up or truck up. Alright, now I need to get the bottom one in and get the tire on board. Now put the wheel on, tighten the bolt down. Always hang your rotor by a wire. Never let it hang from this. That is a good way of having to buy a new $20 brake line. This tire, of course, it takes 80 pounds of pressure. This is a ton van. I can't hardly pick this tire up and put it on there. So what you do is you take a pry bar and you put it under the wheel here and leverage it up instead of trying to lift it up yourself and hurting your back. So now that we got the tire on there, we're going to tighten it down, and then we'll torque the wheel nuts in just a minute. Alright guys, here we go. This is the hardest thing I've ever had to get a concept on, is tightening wheel bearings. I've always had a heck of a time knowing how tight to make them, okay? That's too loose. See that? This is how I set them anymore. I don't go by feel. I got a friend who uses channel locks, and that prevents you from over tightening. But what I want to do is tighten these till there is no more wiggle. Okay? First thing we're going to do is we're going to spin this wheel a whole bunch. I hope that's just... Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to start torquing this down until all the wobble's gone. And we need to seat the bearing. There's still, I had to back that off a whole bunch. wobble, I can feel it. Okay. Raise it down a little bit. Wobble's gone. In the Bronco, if it doesn't fit one way, you turn it over and it'll fit. This is the same way. As you index it around, and the one I want is, I don't have one right there. I'm too lazy to go look for one. Got one mechanic buddy who always just uses he always just puts a nail in there. He don't put cotter pins in it.